Most people know Sylvester Stallone as a symbol of strength, discipline, and power. They see the muscles, the confidence, the victories on a screen, and they assume his life followed a natural path toward success. But the truth is very different. Before the fame, before the money, before the applause, Stallone lived a life that almost erased him. This is not a story about talent being discovered. It is a story about being ignored, rejected, and pushed aside so many times that survival itself became an act of rebellion. Sylvester Stallone was born in 1946 in New York City, but from the moment he entered the world, things went wrong. During his birth, a medical complication damaged a nerve in his face. This injury permanently affected his speech and facial muscles, giving him the slurred voice and expression that would later become famous. As a child, however, it was not charming. It was cruel. Teachers assumed he was slow. Other children mocked him relentlessly. People judged him before he spoke a single word. School was not a place of learning for a Stallone. It was a place of a punishment. He struggled academically, emotionally, and socially. He was expelled from more than a dozen schools. Authority figures labeled him as problematic, aggressive, and difficult. No one tried to understand him. No one asked why he was angry or lost. He learned early that the world had little patience for people who did not fit neatly into expectations. Home offered no refuge. His parents' relationship was unstable, and his childhood lacked security. Stallone often felt unwanted, like an inconvenience rather than a person with value. For many people, that feeling becomes permanent. They shrink, they disappear. But in Stallone, it created something dangerous, a refusal to accept invisibility. As a teenager, Stallone discovered two things that would shape his future: weightlifting and movies. The gym gave him control over his body when everything else felt chaotic. Movies gave him something even more powerful, meaning he watched stories about broken men who fought back against impossible odds. He did not dream of luxury or fame. He dreamed of being seen, of proving that he mattered. When Stallone decided to pursue acting, reality struck hard. Casting directors rejected him almost instantly. They said his voice was wrong, his face was wrong, his presence was wrong. Some told him directly that he would never succeed in film. Others suggested he find a normal job, something practical, something safe. But acting was not a hobby for Stallone. It was his only sense of purpose. The years that followed were brutal. Stallone lived in poverty so extreme that it barely sounds real. He slept in bus stations, libraries, and abandoned buildings. He went days without food. Auditions ended the same way over and over again. Rejection, silence, indifference. He was not just failing, he was being erased. At his lowest point, Stallone faced a moment that would haunt him for years. He had no money left, not enough to eat, not enough to survive. He made the impossible decision to sell his dog for $40 because he could not afford to feed him. Later in life, Stallone would say this moment hurt more than any rejection Hollywood ever gave him. It was not about the dog alone. It was about realizing how close he was to losing himself completely. Most people would have quit. Most people would have accepted defeat and walked away. Stallone did not. Not because he was confident, but because he had reached a point where quitting felt worse than continuing. One night, while watching a boxing match on television, something shifted inside him. The fight was not elegant. It was not perfect. It was about endurance. about getting hit and standing up anyway. Stallone did not see a boxer. He saw his own life reflected on the screen. That night, he began to write. He wrote with desperation, with hunger, with anger, with hope. He poured every rejection, every insult, every moment of doubt into a character, a man who was underestimated, a man who was never expected to win, a man who kept moving forward regardless. That character became Rocky. When Stallone finished the script, he believed in it completely. He believed it because it was honest. But Hollywood did not believe in him. Studios loved the story, but wanted nothing to do with Stallone as the lead. They wanted a recognizable star, a safe investment. They offered him money to sell the script, but only if he stepped aside. For a man who was broken hungry, the offer was tempting. It could have ended his struggle instantly. But Stallone refused. He believed that if he gave up this one chance, he would lose the only thing he truly had left, himself. Rejection followed again, and again, and again. Finally, a studio agreed to take the risk. Stallone could star in the film, but the budget would be extremely small. The pressure would be enormous. If the film failed, his career would end before it began. Rocky was filmed quickly, cheaply, and under constant tension. Stallone trained relentlessly, pushing his body beyond exhaustion. Every scene felt personal. Every punch carried meaning. He was not acting, he was remembering. When Rocky was released, no one expected what happened next. Audiences connected instantly. They saw themselves in the struggle, in the doubt, in the quiet hope that refused to die. The film became a cultural phenomenon. Stallone went from unknown to world famous almost overnight. But this is where most stories stop, and this is where Stallone's real battle began. Fame arrived fast, but peace did not follow. Sylvester Stallone suddenly had money, recognition, and global attention, yet something inside him remained unsettled. The world now applauded him, but the years of rejection had carved deep marks into his identity. He had spent so long fighting to exist that he did not know how to rest. Success did not silence the fear, it amplified it. Hollywood began offering roles immediately, action films, hero stories, strong men. The image fit him perfectly, but Stallone knew something others did not. He was still the same man who had slept in bus stations, still the man who had sold his dog to survive. And deep inside, he feared that all of this could vanish just as quickly as it had appeared. So he worked obsessively. He trained harder than anyone. He wrote constantly. He pushed himself beyond physical and emotional limits. Films like Rocky II, Rocky III, and later Rambo were not just sequels. They were declarations. Each one was a Stallone saying, I am still here, I still matter. But there is a cost to living in constant battle mode. As the years passed, Stallone's body began to suffer. Injuries accumulated, surgeries became routine. Pain was no longer something he prepared for. It was something he lived with every day, yet he refused to slow down because slowing down felt like surrender, and surrender felt like returning to the life he had escaped. Critics began to turn on him. They called his films shallow. They mocked his writing. They dismissed him as outdated. Hollywood moved on to younger faces, newer styles, faster entertainment. For Stallone, this was a familiar feeling. He had been here before. The difference was that now he had something to lose. There's a moment in every long life when a man realizes the world no longer needs him the way it once did. For Stallone, that realization was devastating. He was no longer the underdog. He was becoming the old fighter people politely ignored. And this is where most men break. But Stallone did something unexpected. He allowed himself to be vulnerable. Instead of pretending nothing had changed, he leaned into it. He wrote stories about aging, regret, and legacy. He allowed his characters to feel pain that could not be punched away. Films like Rocky Balboa and Creed were not about winning fights. They were about accepting time, about making peace with what remains when a strength fades. In Creed, Stallone's performance as an aging Rocky was quiet, restrained, and deeply human. For the first time, audiences saw him not as an icon, but as a man who had lived a full life and carried its weight. He won critical acclaim, awards, respect he had waited decades to receive. But the greatest shift did not happen on a screen. It happened inside him. Stallone began to speak openly about failure, fear, and the emotional cost of success. He admitted that fame did not heal old wounds, that money did not erase loneliness, that a strength, when built only on resistance, eventually collapses. He also spoke about regret, about time lost with family, about moments he could not get back, about the price of obsession. He did not glorify it. He told the truth, that chasing greatness without balance can leave you victorious and empty at the same time. And this is where his story becomes deeply personal for the people listening right now. Because most of us do not struggle with fame, we struggle with time. We look back and wonder if we waited too long, if we chose safety instead of meaning, if our best years are already behind us. Stallone's life offers an uncomfortable answer. It says that meaning does not expire, but it also says that everything costs something. Stallone did not become who he was because he never failed. He became who he was because he kept standing back up, even when standing hurt more than falling. In his later years, he returned to something he had lost early in life: gratitude, not for success, but for survival. He reunited with the dog he once sold. He rebuilt relationships. He slowed down, not because he had given up, but because he had finally learned that life is not a fight you win. It is something you carry. Sylvester Stallone once said that life is about how many times you can get hit and still keep moving forward. But what he learned later is something even deeper, that moving forward does not always mean charging ahead. Sometimes it means stopping, reflecting, letting go of the need to prove anything. His story is not about muscles or movies. It is about endurance, about identity, about what happens when a man refuses to accept the version of himself the world assigns him. And maybe that is why his story resonates so strongly with those who have lived long enough to know that dreams change, bodies change, and time never stops. Because Stallone reminds us that dignity does not come from never falling. It comes from rising with honesty. If you are listening to this and thinking about the years behind you, remember this: Stallone's most respected work did not come when he was young. It came when he accepted who he had become, when he has stopped fighting time and has started speaking to it. And that may be the most powerful lesson of all. Not that it is never too late, but that it is never meaningless to keep going.